Aaron Nabus here, and one of my personal heroes when it comes to covering pop culture and comic books is Forbes writer and author of the book Comic-Con and the Business of Pop Culture, Rob Salkowitz. On this episode, which was recorded at San Diego Comic-Con 2018, we got to talk about the first comic book that he read, The Spirit by Will Eisner, which was given to him by his father. We also talk about his connection to underground comic legend Dennis Kitchen, his journey to becoming a writer for Forbes, the future of comics, and how we can be better advocates for diversity. As someone who has been coming to San Diego Comic-Con since the late 90s, watching it explode from 35,000 to well over 135,000 attendees in less than a decade, it was great to hear his perspective. He also gives us some pro tips to have a better experience at San Diego Comic-Con. Please make sure to follow Rob on Twitter at RobSalk, that's ROBSALK, and did you know that he also likes to illustrate? Go check out his Instagram. If you happen to be at a convention and he's moderating a panel, go check it out. He is an excellent panel moderator. 1 minute, he's doing a Q&A with Karen Berger, and then another, he's doing a Shark Tank type panel for pop culture entrepreneurs. Thanks again for being on the Hall H show, Rob, and I look forward to our next conversation. Hey everybody, Aaron Nabus here, and welcome to the Hall H show. We are at San Diego Comic-Con 2018, and I'm joined by Mr. Rob Salkowitz. Welcome to the show, Rob.
Thanks, Aaron. Great to be here.
I'm glad we finally had a chance to sit down and talk. I've been meaning to get you on the show for quite some time, just because you're one of the people that really fascinate me the most, just because you sort of have the handle on the crossroads between pop culture and business, and I find that really fascinating.
Thanks. That's a few years ago I came to this from sort of a business background, and I've always been a comics fan, and so I decided my next book was going to be about the business of Comic-Con, and then the book came out, and now I'm the guy that wrote the book about Comic-Con, so I get to do all this other cool stuff, so it worked out.
Yeah, I just find it really interesting because one con you're doing a panel like with underground comics with Dennis Kitchen, or you're doing a Shark Tank type of panel for pop culture entrepreneurs, or you're got a panel with Karen Berger. So you just have a wide variety of panels, and it just shows how much knowledge you've sort of accumulated through years.
Well, I used the business stuff to get my nose under the tent because I'm a great big nerd about all of this stuff, and I've been a fan for a long time and love talking about the comics as comics. But for a while, my platform was as the comics as business guy, so I got to do a bunch of panels about that. I'm still very interested in that. Obviously, I write about that for Forbes. I write about that for ICB2, so that remains my professional platform. But I just enjoy just the moderating the panels and keeping the conversations going and talking to different creators. So I'm doing a lot more of that at this show and at some of the other shows that I'm at than I had been in the past.
Since you're sort of a personal hero to me, and most of our heroes have an origin story, or superheroes anyway, what were you like as a kid? What were you into?
I was pretty much exactly like I am right now, except it wasn't a good look when you were a 12-year-old kid growing up in the 70s and early 80s. And it's like I was not only into this stuff when I was like 6 years old, and I was reading comics, and my parents had sort of resigned themselves. Okay, you're going to read comics. So my dad comes home with a bunch of Spirit comics by Will Eisner, because he had remembered those from when he was a kid, and he said, if you're going to read these things, at least read good ones. And of course, those are some of the very best, and that began a lifelong fascination, because you can't read The Spirit and look at Eisner's stuff without thinking to yourself, like, how cool that page looks, and how is he doing that, and why are these characters so expressive? And it made me, even at like a super early age, tuned into the art and the structure of it and everything, and that became the kind of nerdy thing that I was into, to the point that when I was actually a little kid, I wrote my one and only fan letter I wrote to The Spirit magazine, which at the time was being published by Kitchen Sink, run by this guy, Dennis Kitchen. So I sent Dennis Kitchen my letter, and he put it into print. And I thought, this is pretty cool to see my name in print. And then 30 years later, when I wrote my manuscript about the comics industry, I sent it to a guy named Dennis Kitchen, who was by that time an agent working in the publishing side, and he got my manuscript into print as my agent. So that's kind of the great circle of things.
It's amazing how that worked out.
It was very funny, and Dennis is a very sweet guy and has been extremely supportive.
Now, how did you find your way to Forbes and
So so I had been doing some writing for Fast Company because my book before the Comic-Con book was a book about entrepreneurship, and it was more like a straight business topic. So Fast Company had asked me to write some stuff for them. So I started, as I was doing the Comic-Con book, I said to my editor, like, I'm getting really into this pop culture stuff. Do you mind if I write about that? So I wrote a bunch of stuff for them that was fairly well received, and I broke some stories about digital comics and that kind of thing. And then that kind of dried up, and I started working for ICV2, the trade pub, where I still have a biweekly column. And I guess at some point somebody at Forbes thought, Forbes is a very conservative, not politically, although I think a little bit of that too, but they're a very staid, traditional publication. So it took them a while to realize that this was an area of the entertainment industry they should be covering, and they went out and they looked for somebody that was like a business writer fundamentally that also understood the industry. So the editor called me up and said, "You want to be a contributor?" I said, "Yeah, sure."
I was sort of a journalist in high school. Did you do your high school newspaper as well?
I did. I was like the journalism geek in high school. So I was the editor of the literary magazine. I was writing stories. I was the editorial editor, and I also drew editorial cartoons for the newspaper. I was on the yearbook staff. It had words in it like that. I was there. That was my thing.
It's interesting how you sort of parlayed your love for writing and journalism to what you're doing right now.
I took the long way around because I got out of school and I moved out. I really didn't have a big plan on what I wanted to do, and I ended up working in sort of marketing and advertising, which was never very attractive to me, but I kind of got into it, and it was Seattle in the 90s, and everybody was doing startups, so I started doing that kind of stuff. I wrote a video game. I wrote, so I was doing all of this stuff at the edges of the industry, and it took me about 25 years from, of career development to get back to the stuff that I'm really passionate about.
Now that you've written the book, Comic-Con, the Business of Pop Culture, and we're at San Diego Comic-Con, I know there's a chapter there near towards the end where you sort of flash forward and you kind of predict how things are going to be. If you were to rewrite that chapter, how would it go now? So
I wrote that book it was about the 2011 Comic-Con, and it came out in 2012, and then I was sort of looking ahead 5 or 7 years in the future, so right about where we're at right now. And, looking back on it, the trajectory of Comic-Con at that point was really steep. Like, if you had been coming here as I had since the late 90s, and you saw it go from being a 35,000, 40,000 person event to 135,000 people in, less than a decade, and I thought, my God, how much more could it go? What I didn't realize is it kind of that was the moment that I had called peak geek. We're still in it. It hasn't dropped off from that. But that's the level that it's at right now. So it's sort of stabilized at this equilibrium, and I think a lot of the rest of the events and entertainment industry has caught up to it. So I think I would have been probably a little bit more prescriptive about how businesses that were not in the comic space, at the moment, could sort of get into what was going on and understand it a little bit better. I also had these 4 scenarios where I was predicting, like, were we going to have endless summer where it was going to continue to be, franchises and consolidation. That's most obviously the world that we're living in from the media and entertainment side. But then I was thinking, well, what if the moment doesn't last? What if the industry experiences a contraction, or if the general economy collapses? That hasn't really happened yet. And I think what's going on in the general economy affects the comics business. Obviously, it affects consumers. I think if we ever do have an economic downturn, we're going to see a big shakeout among the publishers. I think we're going to get more into that, what I call the infinite crisis scenario, where the publishers really cling to that existing user base, reader base, and don't try to expand that much. Belatedly, we're seeing efforts of the big publishers like DC is in Walmart now, both Marvel and DC are expanding their efforts to bring in younger readers, to bring in more diverse audiences, and the resistance that they're meeting around that is kind of interesting. I think I may have thought through the backlash a little bit more on it, because it didn't. At the time, it didn't seem to me that the traditional fans would become as militant and toxic as some of them have become against this encroachment by the younger fans and more diverse audiences. So stuff like that, I think, may have been a bigger deal than I thought. But generally speaking, a lot of the world that I saw 5 or 7 years ago is the world that we're living in right now, and I think a lot of things have caught up to it.
I know for us at the Hall H show, we're big supporters of representation matters, and something that I've noticed at this San Diego Comic-Con is the wealth of panels about diversity. How can we be better advocates to support this movement?
I mean, I think the word is getting out. Like last night at the Eisner Awards, over the last couple of years, the representation at the Eisner Awards has grown. But last night, I think, was a real banner year for women, for people of color, for women of color in particular. There were all of the top titles and all of the big awards, with the exception of like Tom King won something, Mitch Ross won something. But most of the winners were represented. Diversity of creators. So it's great to see the creative talent getting recognized. I think it's good to have panels that focus on this stuff, but I kind of like to internalize it. Like when you tell me, we talked about that I do a lot of panels at shows. One of my personal rules is I'll never do an all-guy panel. I have to see who's on the panel, and I want the diversity to become organic and not something we talk about, just something that is naturally. Of course it's representative because we're representative. That's what our culture is. And these are the people that are making it, and that's an honest representation of the industry.
Mm-hmm. I know that you wrote about Gamergate a few years ago, and they have that whole Comicsgate movement going on right now, and they sort of blame the low sales that comic stores are having to social justice warriors. I mean, is that the case?
I prefer not to even give those guys any oxygen whatsoever. It's a boneheaded issue. They're toxic trolls. They're not arguing in good faith about anything, and I'm not going to engage them on the points that they're making at all. I think the bullying has to stop. The harassment of creators and fans over this stuff is awful, and that's the. There's going to be people of different beliefs. Fans don't agree on anything. You get, 9 fans in a room, you'll get 10 opinions, and that's part of what makes it great. Is that we all have our interests, our biases, our passions, and we should be able to argue about that stuff. But a lot of what's going on with that is other agendas at work that have nothing to do with fandom, have nothing to do with the face value of what they say they're talking about, and it's just about expressing power. It's just about trying to make people feel crappy about stuff or assert their dominance over a culture that they're losing control of. As I said, I'm not interested. I don't review their stuff, and I try not to engage them at any level.
I guess going forward to some of the trends that you've sort of written about and talked about in different panels concerning the future of comic books. I know you've had a few panels that dealt with the digital delivery of comic books. There's actually a panel here at Comic-Con about webtoon.com. I'm actually a big fan of what they're doing. If you check out webtoon.com, you can check out a bunch of awesome online comic books for free, mostly from South Korea, but they're starting to accept a lot of creators from around the world outside of South Korea. So, I mean, what are some of the trends that you noticed that are?
I mean, I think that the way that especially younger people, are consuming this kind of content now, it's all about, on their mobile device. The form factor of the mobile device, you can't show a whole comics page. You want to do it one panel at a time. You want to do vertical scrolling because that's a natural motion. And these new platforms are optimized for that. And I think that people that read comics like that become creators. They start conceiving of their storytelling in that way. I mean, I think that we need a new, sort of understanding comics like a textbook framework for storytelling in that format, so that we can understand that.
You bring up an awesome point, because I was talking to somebody the other day, and he said he actually prefers creating comic books with tablets in mind, because you can have it one sort of page at a time. You don't get the reveal until later. Whereas if you're reading a floppy, you kind of see what's kind of coming ahead.
Well, the people that do the floppies know where their page turns are, and they know, like when they're on an odd numbered page, and you're going to have to turn the page to see the next panel. Yeah. So I think the people that are good at that understand that medium, and they understand the simultaneity of being able to see all that stuff. And you read Understanding Comics or any of the texts about how comics are put together, and that's like fundamental to it. I don't think that we have as formal an understanding of how the digital medium works for comics yet. And as I'm saying this, maybe I should write it. I don't know. This is it's interesting to me because it's different. It's a related medium in the same way that, like, animation is related, or 360 video is related to regular filmmaking, but it requires some different tool sets and different stuff.
Let's switch gears and talk about your artwork. For those of our audience who are interested, they can check out Rob's Instagram account, because he does post some of the artwork that he does. I find it fascinating.
When I was a kid, I was that was part of it. Everybody that's a comics fan at some point sees themselves as a comic artist, and you start drawing, doing various drawings. When I was a kid and I was going to conventions, I would submit my art to the contests, and I would sometimes win. And I realized at a certain point one of the things, I was good at writing and I was good at drawing, and one of them I would make my living at, and the other one I would just do for my own pleasure. So I turned the writing into a vocation. That's my job, and I do the art to relax and unwind. And since the election, one of the ways that I've been managing my stress and anger at everything that's been going on is that when I get pissed off at something, I'll pick up the sketchbook. So I've been getting a lot of practice, and I've been trying to get better at it. I don't know. I mean. I'm friends with a lot of people who are professional artists who have been very encouraging, but I'm a long way from getting my shit together to have it do anything with it other than just thinking around with it right now. But thanks for mentioning it, I guess.
I guess we'll do a quick thunder round before you need to take off, because I know you have a meeting in a few minutes. If I gave you $1 million, what would you do with it?
Wow. I don't know. It's like I don't have kids, so you can't take it with you. So I don't know. There's a lot of causes right now that are a lot of things that don't get enough support. You build something that lasts, that will help people get through what's going on right now. I don't know. I'm part of. So one of the things I'm doing is I'm on the board of this organization back in Seattle called C4C3, which is Comics for Compassion, Community, and Culture. Something like that. Sorry, Scott. I know it's something like that. Anyway, it's a group that gives grants to schools and libraries to help promote digital graphic literacy and creativity among school-age kids.
No, I like it.
I think it's a fantastic project, and I think there needs to be more of that because I don't think there's one thing that's going to get us past all the nonsense that's going on, except for individual people to become more creative and expressive and tolerant, and just overwhelm the ignorance and stupidity.
Mm-hmm. If you could have dinner with anybody dead or alive, or maybe even fictional, just to have fun, who would it be, and where would you eat?
Damn, you're stumping the band here. Let's see. Harlan Ellison, who left us recently, I never met him in person, but I've been hearing the stories for years and years, and maybe just because I'm a glutton for punishment, I think that might be a cool thing to maybe have tacos with him and Anthony Bourdain somewhere.
Anthony Bourdain is one person I definitely would love to.
It seems like the interesting people are the most difficult sometimes.
Yeah.
Vice versa.
Right. I know you went to the Eisners last night. If you had a opportunity to make your own version of the Mount Rushmore, but have comic creators on it, who would be your 4 on there?
Well, I mean, I'm a sucker for the classics, so I mean, it's got to be Eisner, who is my own personal influence, who I did get a chance to meet. Was wonderful.
Oh, nice.
Wonderful guy, and really the benefactor of all of this stuff. I'm a big Jack Kirby fan. I also I like Alex Toth and these people that can like do this very simplified storytelling. And I don't know. I mean, there's so many to choose from. This is a problem. I don't know. It's like, yeah, but my tastes are like old guy tastes. So I like the stuff I grew up with.
Right.
I mean, choose from Steve Ditko or Joe Kubert or any of these people are just they built a business.
If you had a chance to sing the last song at a karaoke joint, what would it be? You're closing the night down.
Probably the only thing that I could sing, that I could put across a reasonable version of it, would be something like Born to Run or something sung by somebody that doesn't have much of a voice.
If you were president of the United States, what kind of artwork would you put in the Oval Office?
Wow. Damn. You're like mega conceptual here. I don't know. Something about Bill Sienkiewicz.
Nice.
Shake people up.
Awesome. Yeah, and he's here at Comic-Con, so that's pretty appropriate.
Yeah, he's part of a exhibit up in Seattle, and I wrote so they're having a catalog for this Marvel Art of Marvel show is going to be traveling. So they're doing a catalog of the show, and I had the opportunity to write a piece about Bill and his work in the '80s and everything. So
Nice.
It's much on my mind.
I guess we can sort of turn the conversation back to your any projects that you have in the pipeline that you want our audience to know about.
I secretly had a book come out last week. So it's an academic project. It's not of general interest, but this economist professor wrote me into this project on called Superheroes in Economics, the Shadowy World of Capes, Masks, and Invisible Hands.
Ooh,
and it's basically a bunch of economists tackling these sort of geeky subjects like how does Spider-Man pay the rent, or how does African economic development in the real world compare with Wakanda. So they wanted me in it because I'm not an economist, but I write about business and comics, and I have a name that they can put on the book. So.
When you said Invisible Hands, I thought it was going to be like something about the free market system or something like that.
It is. It's about the free market. I mean, the Invisible Hands is an economic pun. That's they don't call it the dismal science for nothing. So anyway, so it's this collection of and the essays turned out really good. It's by all of these academics, and they're like sort of looking at the world of pop culture through the lens of economics. I wrote a piece about Alan Moore in that. So that came out from Routledge. It's priced at like $40 for the. Ask your library to order a copy or something like that. I mean, they don't seem to be interested in selling them to human beings, but just FYI, it's and then I have a piece in the new Full Bleed #2 from IDW that just came out at the convention on comics and museums, where I'm surrounded by some amazingly talented people like Gideon. Sorry, I just blanked on his last name. The guy who just won the Eisner for the Marley's Ghost book. Anyway, there's a lot of great talent in that Full Bleed issue, so go out and pick it up. It's $25 at your local comic store.
Cool. We'll look forward to that. And I guess the last question...
Gideon Kendall. Sorry,
Kendall.
Gideon.
Since we are at San Diego Comic-Con, what are some sort of pro tips that you can tell some of our audience?
Don't schedule yourself too tightly, something that I'm learning the hard way at this convention. Because you're always juggling stuff, people are canceling, and you got to like piss people off by moving stuff around and things like that. I like to get here a couple of days early because, it's like you get that sense of anticipation. There's a great line from an old Simpsons episode that's like, better than the deed, better than the memory, the anticipation. And when you're here on like Monday and Tuesday when they're setting stuff up, but it's not like things haven't quite reached a boil yet. That's one of my favorite parts. And then once it, achieves escape velocity, then you're just along for the ride. So.
Cool, I like that. Where can people find you online?
So best way to find me is follow me on Twitter at RobSalk. My Forbes, I do Forbes stuff about 7 times a month. And then I write for ICV2. I have a big story coming out in Publishers Weekly in the next couple of weeks on comics and video games. So I tweet about all of that stuff. So if you follow the Twitter, you can find my other stuff.
Cool. Can't wait to share that with the world. I appreciate you coming on the podcast, and I know you have to run off for a meeting, and you have a panel later on today. So it's always a pleasure to see you at conventions.
Thanks for having me on. I've been waiting to do this for a while, and I'm glad it worked out. Great conversation.
Cool. Got to do it again.
All right. Take care.
Thank you, sir.